And good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and we are so happy to have you with us. What's going to be a really fun show today, getting ready for Georgia-Missouri. We're going to kind of focus in on what I believe may ultimately determine the outcome of this game on Saturday. And if you believe Georgia's going to win, this may be what determines the kind of closeness of the win, or perhaps lack thereof. You're looking for sort of a high quality of life, being able to kick back and relax and enjoy kind of a easy coasting to victory there on Saturday afternoon. This one issue may tell you everything you need to know about that. We'll talk about that here coming up in a moment. Also, I think we all need to take some time to appreciate the fact that tomorrow represents a little bit of the end of an era when it comes to something pretty important. You're perhaps already thinking about this. We'll make sure you take some time to think about it a little bit more here coming up in just a moment. Plus, final thoughts on a giant weekend worth of games here. A lot of this is relevant to Georgia there too, so we'll focus in on that. And big visitors expected to be on tap for Georgia tomorrow there as well. So we'll look at the recruiting angle for Georgia-Missouri, and perhaps rumor it out there, online chatter, if you will, of a committed elsewhere prospect showing up at UGA. What is the latest on this? Jeff Sintel will help tell us about all of that here coming up in just a moment. So what do you say we get it started? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, it just feels a little bit different when you got a big game on tap, and Saturday is a big game on tap for Georgia and Missouri. I believe the team views it that way. This is a Missouri team ranked 12th in the country. This is a Missouri team that played Georgia close a year ago. So if you're trying to sell to the Georgia players of, hey, be ready, be at your best, I think Missouri right now has the credentials to justify that. Plus, let's keep in mind here that Missouri beat the reigning Big 12 champs, Kansas State, earlier this year. So that's kind of that signature-style win to give you an idea that, yeah, this is probably the best team that Georgia has played thus far this season. I believe it's probably the best team that Georgia will play throughout the regular season there as well. You could make a case that Tennessee on the road is a perhaps tougher game because of the environment. But in terms of comparing the opponents, I believe there's a case to be made that the toughest game that Georgia plays this season will be on Saturday. What my hope is, and I believe we'll be proven right on this, what my hope is that Georgia fans also understand that too, and that we're exactly a year removed from the incredible environment that existed in Sanford Stadium, probably the best single moment maybe in the history of that stadium. Certainly for me, perhaps the most fun week leading up to that game against Tennessee a year ago in the entire history of DawgNation Daily, which dates back to 2015. Just an incredible moment when fans for Georgia were better than they've ever been before. I'd love to think tomorrow it can be a replica of that. I hope that it will. We'll all be watching closely to see if that's indeed the case. Now, also coming up in a couple of minutes here, I was kind of teasing this with our video audience earlier. Saturday also represents a little bit of an end of an era type thing for UGA, and you need to be aware of this. Perhaps you already are, but we'll kind of get into that here coming up in just a little bit too. Prior to that, though, let's go between the white lines for a moment, and let's look at what might be the absolute deciding factor in this game on Saturday. It's those kind of special situations. Eli Drinkwitz, the Missouri coach, talked about that a little bit earlier this week, that for a Missouri team that's a couple of touchdown underdog here, and from a perception standpoint, perhaps even a wider gap between the two teams than that, they know they need to do some special things. They know they need to be good in the exact right moments to have a chance to pull this upset off. And Drinkwitz this week, and I think this is actually pretty candid and kind of accurate. It's always nice in a press conference situation when coaches kind of give you something that sort of feels real and something that's more than just, hey, we got to block and tackle and, got to take it one play at a time. I think that Drinkwitz kind of gives you a little bit more on that than with this here, kind of zeroing in on what truly might matter for his team on Saturday if they really do have a chance to come here and pull the upset against the two-time national champion Georgia that hasn't lost at home in seemingly forever. This is what Eli Drinkwitz said about that what would it take to get that done. Drinkwitz from earlier this week. Take a listen to this.
That's going to be very important, right, on both sides of the ball. I think you could look at this game as a third down red zone game. I think when we look at the statistics after the game, we're going to look who took advantage of the red zone opportunities and who had the best, or who did the best job on third downs.
So that's what Drinkwitz says. Hey, you got to be good on third down, got to be good on the red zone. Now, I'm going to confess something to you here. I obviously had known that Georgia had some red zone issues, but I had a commenter on our R.S. Andrews cooldown. We do the R.S. Andrews cooldown at the end of every show. Folks have a chance on video to kind of take some comments. They share comments. I read them. We kind of talk about what they had to say. And somebody pointed out something to me yesterday that I wasn't quite aware of. I knew that Georgia had its red zone issues, but I'll be honest with you, I had no idea how significant those issues were. You hear Eli Drinkwitz, the Missouri coach there, say that we got to be good in the red zone. We got to be good on third down. Those situational moments when we have the ball, or perhaps defensively, those situational moments when Georgia has the ball, that's what this game is going to come down to. And for Georgia in particular, even though statistically speaking, this has still been a very good, kind of Georgia, defensive year. I mean, it's not a huge outlier compared to what the last couple of years have been, at least for the most part. The one spot where Georgia has not been good, and this has been an eye-opener for a lot of us during the games, and I found out yesterday statistically just how true this is how bad Georgia has been at giving up touchdowns when its defense is in the red zone against somebody else's offense. Did you know that Georgia's last in the SEC in this category? Did you know that 76.47% of opponent red zone trips against Georgia have resulted in touchdowns? That's wild, right? That is such an outlier from what you've come to expect from Georgia. It's really pretty concerning. Now, if there is a silver lining to that, the caveat is, well, Georgia doesn't allow nearly as many trips into the red zone as a lot of teams in the SEC are going to, but they have given up 13 red zone touchdowns here this year. So that's been a vulnerability. That's been a weakness. And I always, when I see things like this that are kind of outliers, in other words, if you look at the overall profile of Georgia defensively, it's still really stout. They've given up some weird touchdowns to begin games. They've given up some weird red zone touchdowns. But on a per-play basis, Georgia defensively has still been pretty strong. So I have a tendency to sort of view this sometimes as one of those sort of statistical anomalies that perhaps clears itself up as the year goes along. But let's face it, we're also getting a little deeper into the year yet, at this point. And it's not quite cleared itself up completely as of yet. So this is something to be aware of. Last year, Georgia went to Como as a 30-point favorite, and this game was far closer than it was supposed to be. This particular Saturday, Georgia sees itself slightly in excess of a 2-touchdown favorite. Once again, there is danger that this game could be closer than it perhaps is expected to be. And if it is, as we said yesterday, perhaps it's a breakdown on that opening drive and that sort of play script moment for the opposing offense, having the success the way that Florida did a week ago. A touchdown could make a difference when you're playing a team in Missouri that's perhaps better than Florida was last week. And breakdowns in the red zone could be the same type of deal here, where at some point in time, when you do allow a team to get inside the 20 on you, you got to try to find a way to keep them out of the end zone, perhaps better than Georgia's done this year. So this week, during one of his press availabilities, Kirby Smart was asked, what do you do during practice to try to alleviate what's been kind of a rare blemish for your defense, giving up points inside the 20 here thus far this season? And, Smart gave, the best answer he could possibly provide on this. This is what Kirby said they're doing right now to sort of work on some of these red zone defensive issues.
Yeah, we're doing the same thing we've done every year. So the result's been different, but the process has been the same. So we've tried to make a bigger emphasis on it. And when you say try to do anything different, you're just trying to do more of doing it right, like eye control, doing your job, stopping the run, those things.
I don't know there's a lot of tangible information to take out of what Kirby Smart says there, but I do believe the tone probably matters. And you don't certainly hear any kind of panic or distress in Smart's voice as he talks about some of those kinds of things. What you hear is a fairly calm demeanor, and perhaps that suggests that as Georgia kind of moves through the year here, they can get better in this category. Like red zone touchdown against Florida last week, that kind of comes garbage time late in the game. You had some backups in there, so perhaps there's a little bit of an asterisk around that. And perhaps as you start moving into games against better offenses, in games that perhaps matter more, you see the Georgia defense for the totality of the game play a little bit more like what you're used to seeing. But I do believe that Drinkwitz is right. Watch here on third down. Watch here red zone for both teams. Offense against defense, defense against offense. That's going to be one of those things that determines, does Georgia get the win? Is it comfortable? Is it easy? Or does Missouri come in here like a year ago when Georgia on the road and have a chance to challenge there? Now, let me take a moment here to kind of sort of broaden this out and expand on this and kind of give you, I guess these would be sort of my official thoughts on the game as it relates to Saturday. I do like Georgia here in this spot. And the one thing, because I am a Georgia fan, typically I have my Georgia gear on for the show. Today I've got my high school football gear tonight on Peachtree Sports Network. But, normally I'm wearing the red and black. We kind of view this show from a sort of a Georgia fan-centric perspective. You always want to make sure of, okay, well, if you like Georgia here in this spot, if you believe they're going to win, then, what perhaps are you not considering? What perhaps should be looked at from a little closer vantage point to perhaps make the case for the opposition a little bit more? A lot of folks have talked about this week Missouri having the extra week to prepare. But so far in the Eli Drinkwitz era, that hasn't necessarily mattered. Bye weeks haven't been a big part of Drinkwitz's tenure thus far at Missouri. He's 2-2 against the spread in 4 games dating back to his first season in 2020. Of course, 2020 was weird. They had a couple of bye week moments then. But 2-2 in 4 previous games in the Drinkwitz era against the spread coming off byes. The 2 failed covers have been in each of the last 2 years. Games against Vanderbilt, they come to find out were just closer than they were supposed to be. Still Missouri wins, but not Missouri covers. So not only has the bye week not really allowed Missouri to particularly play much better, it also hasn't come prior to playing like a major opponent. I'm sure if you're Missouri, the fact that you've had your bye week prior to the Vanderbilt game the last couple of years has probably been a little bit frustrating. But nonetheless, 2-2 against the spread in 4 previous games for Drinkwitz after a bye. Not exactly a huge argument in favor of that. Plus, here's the thing to remember. This is sort of the spot where Georgia has been really good. Georgia's covered the spread in 4 of its last 5 SEC games at home. So when you think about an SEC team coming into Sanford Stadium, loud crowd, raucous environment, focused level of attention from Georgia, Dogs have typically been at their best, and I have to say that's sort of what I'm expecting to see again tomorrow there as well. And if all you care about is who wins the game, that's perhaps good news. But if you want to take this to a step further and kind of think about this from a point spread perspective, right now you've seen Georgia, I think the game opened at 17? It's actually kind of fallen some throughout the week. I think we've kind of seen it around that sort of 15.5 number. I'm honestly not sure what it is exactly right now because I didn't look at it prior to the show starting, but it's been kind of around that 15.5, 16 type number, slightly above the 2 touchdowns there, but underneath that key number of 17. What I'm going to tell you here is at that price, I think you're getting Georgia at a real bargain. As I mentioned earlier, Georgia was like a 30-point favorite at Missouri a year ago. Last time Missouri came here to Athens in 2021, Missouri was a 40-point, I should say Georgia was a 40-point favorite against Missouri. Now, part of that spread is dropping is because Missouri has gotten better, but nonetheless, this is a part of a recent trend we've seen from UGA. Last week, Georgia was only about a 14.5-point favorite against Florida. They were 23-point favorites the previous year, and it's not obvious right now how much better this Florida team will be than the one a year ago. There's clearly a little bit of I guess you call it a drop in the perception of UGA. After all, Georgia only covered the spread in one of its first 7 games here this year, so that maybe creates an opportunity to sort of take a look at the underdog for a little bit of a longer look. But when we do take that longer look, we're still coming away liking Georgia. The magic number we've been giving you is 13. That's what Georgia gave up exactly a year ago to Tennessee. The Tennessee offense that Georgia faced then, far better than this Missouri offense now. A week ago, had not been the garbage time touchdown late in the game when Florida was still desperate to get whatever points they could, Georgia would have held those lousy stinking Gators to 13 points. Georgia, I believe, can do that again on Saturday there as well. And I think that Georgia finds the 30s. This is just an offense right now under Mike Bobo with Carson Beck at the helm. They're averaging 40 points per game. I don't think finding 30 or more tomorrow is difficult at all. So if you're looking for the kind of nice, fun, 2-touchdown plus sort of win from these Dogs, I think that's what they're capable of doing. And in doing so, sending a message to the rest of college football that at exactly the right time, Georgia's coming to its own, playing its best football when it matters most. That's what I expect to see happen from these Dogs tomorrow. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Kroger, and we are happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Live on video. We start first and 15, 9:45, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. That is extra content. Somebody asked me the other day, how come you only do that on DawgNation.com? Because here's the reason why, or the DawgNation app. Here's the reason why. a couple of years ago, we said, okay, we need to introduce a brand new platform for our show, and we want to do that kind of on our own platform. Not one of these things that big tech sort of acts as the overlord for us on. We want our own platform, our native content, if you will. And so we started rolling out DawgNation.com and on the DawgNation app, and we wanted to say thank you to those who kind of tuned in to watch there. We are, for the most part, platform agnostic, but when it comes to kind of introducing a new platform, a little bit of extra juice to sort of help build that thing up, and I would say it's worked really well. Thousands of you watch on DawgNation.com each and every day, for which I am eternally, eternally grateful. And our way of saying, small token of our appreciation, a thank you, is by our first and 15 there at DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. 10 a.m., we're live everywhere across all video platforms. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Podcast, the oldest platform. I would say still if I was being honest, my favorite of the platforms. Just really, really thankful to have everybody who tunes in, however you choose to do it. Thanks for being here and being a part of our show. And boy, what a big thanks we go to our friends at Kroger for making this all possible there as well. And guess what? It's sort of that Thanksgiving time of year. We're in November. Everybody enjoying fall. And finally, for those of you that like, what do they call it? Sweater weather. Had a little sweater weather here the last few days, so that kind of makes it feel even more like fall, which is kind of a nice thing here. And when you think about fall, think about a fall-themed version of Kroger Chef Jr. We've heard from folks here as of late who've done the Kroger Chef Jr. with their kids. They love that. They've had a great time with that. We want to invite you to do the same thing there as well. This guided kids cooking experience making festive fall muffins. Boy, that sounds good. That's coming up this Saturday. That's November 5th and November 12th there as well at select Kroger locations. Now, you've heard me talk to you about this before, but if you're not familiar, let me tell you what the Kroger Chef Jr. experience is all about. It's a 30-minute class. Your child's going to get an apron and a patch, a chef's hat, a recipe. First of all, I just wish I had a chef's hat. That'd be awesome. A recipe card and box, and a mini muffin pan. It's just $7 per child, making those festive fall muffins here this month. So please check out KrogerChefJr.com for more on this. That's JUNIOR. Kroger Chef Jr., the word junior all spelled out, for more on that. Make sure you check that out today and make sure you enjoy all of that. Now, if you're going to Kroger Chef Jr. tomorrow, that perhaps means you are watching the Georgia-Missouri game on television. So let's talk about that for a moment as a part of Around the Doghouse, poured today by the Finnish Long Drink. And by the way, if you're settling in to watch the game tomorrow at home, a little Finnish Long Drink in the fridge, I would say, is a great way to accompany you on all of that. Many of you are aware of this, but let's expand this a little bit more for the folks who perhaps have not considered this. Tomorrow is the end of an era. Tomorrow is I believe, let's say almost certainly, perhaps not a guarantee, but almost certainly, I think tomorrow is going to end up being the last time a certain something ever happens for UGA. And I got to tell you, I'm a little bit sad about it. I believe tomorrow will end up being the last Georgia home game that airs on CBS at 3:30 p.m. The great theme song, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Like tomorrow will be the last day, if you tune in to watch this on CBS, that you got that great time slot, you got that great theme song, the great, normally it's Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson. I'm presuming they're doing the LSU-Alabama game tomorrow night. This will be our last time in Athens to have this. Of course, Georgia-Ole Miss is next week, but I'm led to believe, according to some of the online chatter, that Georgia can't be on CBS next week, that they probably will be Knoxville against Tennessee, but can't be next week perhaps. So I'm guessing that next Saturday's game, it is a home game, but I sort of get the impression it perhaps will not be a 3:30 CBS. If I'm wrong, then we'll do all this again next Saturday. But one way or another, we're kind of coming down to the end of an era for the SEC on CBS. And I know a lot of you like the absolute night games the best of all. I've always felt like the 3:30 game on CBS is just sort of the best of college football, especially in the fall like this, because when the sun's sort of setting, that earlier sunset, by the way, time changes this weekend too, which I thought we were doing away with, but apparently we're not. Either way, the time's changing this weekend. But as that sun sort of sets during the game, you look out there across the west end zone, across the bridge and all that kind of stuff. It's always beautiful in Athens. It's kind of dark by the time the game's over with, but it's, kind of nice and daylight when the game begins. You get mostly a full day's worth of tailgating if that's what you're there to do, and you perhaps don't get home quite so late, which as I get a little older gets more and more the kind of thing I have a tendency to appreciate. I just love the 3:30 CBS, and I've loved the pageantry of the CBS broadcast told you many times before that I just think CBS does a far better job covering college football than I think ESPN does. And I think as the SEC solely moves its product to the ESPN family of networks next year, my charge for ESPN, my call to ESPN is step up your game and improve the quality of your telecast, the camera angles, the perhaps broadcasters in some respects, certainly the presentation on TV. I don't want to see a score ticker of WNBA scores while I'm watching college football. That's an event for me. I don't care about any other sporting event that's going on. I think ESPN just needs to dress up its product to make it look a little bit more big time. I think that CBS has been really good at doing that. So tomorrow is one of our final times to enjoy that. Obviously, we have great memories of, like, say, Vern Lundquist and Gary Danielson dancing the blackout game in 2007, but whatever else, it's just kind of a cool moment. And maybe you get it again against Ole Miss. I sort of suspect you probably won't be. I believe this will be the final Georgia home game that's sort of Saturday, CBS 3:30. That's what I'm gearing up for to be. One thing we know for sure is it's also the last SEC doubleheader. This is the kind of thing like first Saturday in November they've done for a long time. The two SEC games, a big one at 3:30, the big one again there at 8 p.m. They've done this, and it's obviously Georgia, Missouri in the early slot with Alabama, LSU in the late slot there as well. So at the very least, we know that's sort of the end of an era. The last time CBS will have this SEC doubleheader for us there as well. And my guess is we'll be for the DawgNation postgame show there at the UGA bookstore up on the second floor when the game is done tomorrow, and it's going to feel, I believe, a little bit like some of these games have felt like in the past, where I think the Georgia fans are going to really have their eye on Alabama LSU. First of all, it's a great game. Obviously, we know that's the case. But I believe for Georgia, the stakes here are pretty interesting, right? Because if Alabama wins, it's sort of obvious what the narrative, what the storyline is going to be. You're talking about, a team in Alabama that's perhaps going to march its way towards an 11-1 regular season mark coming into the SEC championship, presuming that Georgia also continues to win out. Setting up one of these sort of classic showdowns between Saban and Kirby, Georgia and Alabama. High stakes, big game. Everybody sort of understands that. If LSU were to win, it sort of seems like it throws the SEC West into chaos a little bit more. You're talking about an Ole Miss team that, assuming it beats Texas A&M on Saturday, would come to Athens the following week with a lot to play for. They would still be alive in the SEC West race, and the whole thing would sort of feel chaotic, and you're kind of left to conclude, well, does an LSU win, does that diminish Georgia's game in the SEC championship, assuming that Georgia's able to get there? But I want to share this with you for one moment. There's at least one prominent analyst who doesn't think so. At least one prominent analyst is actually sort of talking up the LSU side here in a game against Alabama on Saturday. Despite the fact that LSU's already lost to Ole Miss and already lost to Florida State, apparently Joel Klatt from Fox Sports believes that the team that'll play after Georgia on CBS tomorrow, LSU, could perhaps be alive still in the college football playoff race and perhaps could be on track, according to Klatt, to maybe even beat Georgia in the SEC championship. So if you need some context for why the Alabama-LSU game tomorrow night matters to you, this is what Klatt said on his own show about that here this week.
We've never seen a two-loss team in the playoff. However, if we're going to see it, it would be a team that would knock off the back-to-back defending national champion. My next sleeper is LSU. We've got to pay attention to LSU. This team has a path. I know, even with two losses, and I know they didn't look great early. But if Florida State remains undefeated, and you can say, like, that game was all the way in the beginning of the year, like, that doesn't look quite as bad if Florida State is as good as we think that they could be, and if they remain undefeated and win the ACC. Then that would mean that LSU would go to Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama this week. It would also mean that they would get a win against presumably Georgia in the SEC championship game, and Georgia hasn't even lost since the 2021 SEC championship game. So now all of a sudden, you're going to get huge momentum for LSU.
I had a DawgNation Daily viewer tell me yesterday, flat out in no uncertain terms, that he thinks that LSU would be a tougher opponent for Georgia in the SEC championship than Alabama would be, assuming that Georgia's able to get there. I certainly think that's an interesting point of view. I don't know that I agree with that yet, but I don't know that I disagree with that. LSU was, if you'll remember, for me, a preseason pick to make the college football playoff. And I have, to be honest with you, almost totally abandoned that because they are far worse defensively than I expected them to be. And I did not think that Jaden Daniels had the capability of proving to be as good as he has. So in other words, I've gotten it so wrong about LSU that even if they did kind of emerge as a contender again, I can't really take ownership of that because this is just not quite the LSU team that I expected it to be. But it is interesting to hear Joel Klatt sort of talking them up there right there. So my point is simply this. On kind of the last time for an SEC doubleheader on CBS, obviously you appreciate that 3:30 time slot for Georgia, Missouri tomorrow. But if you're a UGA fan, I think it's time to start paying attention to what is happening in the SEC West. Is this an Alabama team, perhaps a little bit like Georgia, figuring it out at the right time, setting themselves up with running game and defense and maybe just enough of Jalen Milroe to be truly dangerous when it perhaps plays Georgia in the first Saturday in December? Or is this LSU super explosive on offense, as bad a defense as you possibly can find? Is that a team that has the unique mix of just being explosive enough that they create a level of danger there for Georgia? I think UGA fans ought to have their attention on Tuscaloosa there tomorrow night to kind of find out what the scenario is in the SEC West. And what we're talking about right now is a very interesting, challenging stretch for Georgia. How much of the first Saturday in December kind of also starts to creep into this too, that if Georgia can get past Missouri, Ole Miss, Tennessee, that it's looking at an SEC championship where there could be some pretty high stakes on the line, including guys like Joel Klatt touting the possibility of a 2-loss LSU team playing well enough to be back in playoff consideration. That's interesting stuff, and that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Now, big tailgate tomorrow. I need you at your best in Athens tomorrow. I know you will be. And the fuel to get you there, perhaps, is our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And in the Peach State, for a limited time, of course, you know, it's the peach-flavored version of the Finish Long Drink there as well. I mean, just look at that can, that glistening can, the peach color, the condensation just dripping down the side. Isn't that perfect? Doesn't that look good when you pull that out of the cooler tomorrow and you pop the top? I believe we're going to have decent-ish weather for the day tomorrow. I'm not a meteorologist, but I believe it's going to be decent weather for the game tomorrow there. So fun tailgate experience and a fun time to try perhaps all of the varieties of the Finish Long Drink. Not just the peach-flavored version, perhaps the Long Drink Cranberry. Many of you love that. The Long Drink Strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. Long Drink Zero, no carbs, no sugar. For those of you that want to look good, that's a great way to help you do that. Or the traditional, probably my favorite still, even after all these years. Grapefruit-flavored gin kick. You love that. So make sure you find it out online. And you can figure out where to pick some up today. It's thelongdrink.com. It's been awarded as the best tasting drink in its category many times. It's the ready-to-drink cocktail right there in a can. You like mixed drinks? Well, this is one that's already mixed for you. So find them online, thelongdrink.com, and you can figure out where to pick some of that up today and make it a big part of your tailgate experience. Of course, we're glad to have the Finish Long Drink as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. Okay, so before we're done, I am going to give you my final thoughts on LSU, Alabama, kind of pick a winner in this, sort of settle on my pick for that. So we'll kind of close the show out the way that we have all on Fridays recently. So just some sort of final sort of overarching thoughts on some of the big games. I don't like to brag, but I was 6-0 with my picks last week. So you'll see that more of that later on today on Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. But was 6-0 last week, so perhaps a little bit of credibility with what we're talking about here today. We'll do that here to wrap things up. By the way, that's 6-0 against the spread, too. Let's not forget that. But we'll do that to wrap up the show here today. For now, though, a lot going on as it relates to Georgia recruiting, including impressive list of visitors for Saturday and perhaps some committed elsewhere chatter here, too. So let's talk about that, all of it with Jeff Sintel here right now on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Fun to have the Dogs back at home. 3:30 time slot makes it a little easier for some of those guys playing on Friday nights to make their way over to the Classic City in time to be hosted and wined and dined, so to speak, figuratively speaking, getting ready for the game against Missouri on Saturday, which should be an incredible atmosphere. So the hope here is a lot of good recruits will be in the building. Jeff, if you don't mind, let's begin with there on that. What are you hearing right now about perhaps who will be in the stands for Georgia against Missouri tomorrow? Obviously, a great chance to host a great crop of visitors. We're assuming anyway. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Brandon, can we call it sodaed and bottled watered instead of wined and dined? Is that what we can call it?
Yeah, perhaps that's better said, yeah.
Hey, here's the thing, man. I heard you talking about maybe swan songs with CBS earlier in your show, but it's also kind of a swan song, or at least it's twilight for the Georgia home recruiting calendar. They've only got one more slated home game next week, and then that's all the games in Sanford. Kind of wild, Brandon. Today to think about, this weekend is homecoming. Next weekend is senior night, senior day, whatever you want to call. Kind of wild to see this season has really just sped by. As far as kind of like big-time recruits, you're expected to see, every time Ellis Robinson visits Georgia, man, it's a big deal to me, the number one corner in the country. He's expected. Andre Evans, the recent flip from LSU out of Christ Presbyterian in Nashville, Tennessee, he's going to be in town. He's expected to take his official visit. I believe that's going to be his first ever visit to Sanford Stadium for a game. That's always good when Georgia gets a commit in the house, when they committed before actually experiencing Sanford on a game day. Another name to look for is Terrell Anderson, NC State wide receiver. Guy that's kind of been trending to Georgia, trending away from NC State for a while now, especially in the embers of the Nycar situation for Georgia. Those are kind of the big-time 2024s. I expect a lot of the 2024 commitments to be there. Zayden Walker, the 2025 linebacker out of Slade County, his team in Ellenville, Schley County. He's been doing great this year, number one linebacker in the country. Another trip to Georgia. He's expected to see Georgia play Tennessee up in Knoxville in a couple more weeks. A couple five-stars to think about. A young man out of Westgate High School in Louisiana. Javari Antoine, the number 5 quarterback in the country, number 6 quarterback in the country. He's a 5-star. Just recently offered by Georgia earlier this month. Georgia's in on another 5-star corner. I know Brandon loves to hear that.
No doubt.
Perhaps the biggest, and it's the guy I'm probably going to go see tonight, biggest by the eyeball test, is Juan Gaston Jr., priority, really, offensive tackle for the 2025 class. Everybody's been worried or kind of clutching their pearls a little bit about why Juan Gaston Jr. hasn't made it to Athens yet. Well, he gave me a schedule at the beginning of the year, and he's kind of following his schedule about the visits he's going to take. He actually has an audible this week where he's going to see Georgia this week and next week. So everybody wondering about the 6'8", 335-pounder, and whether he's disinterested in Georgia because he hasn't visited yet. Turns out Juan Gaston Jr. just likes to see late-season cold-weather games, it looks like, because he's going to see enough of the Dogs this month as well. Another name, I know you've seen him, I know you've called games with him before, Brandon, is Aaron Gregory.
Yeah.
I think he's a 5-star safety or receiver, whatever he wants to be in the 2026 class out of a really powerful Douglas County team this year in Douglasville. He just got an offer from Ohio State to play wide receiver. That verifies the skill level there on the national scene. Although he's just a 2026, Aaron Gregory is also going to be in the house, and he kind of reminds me a lot as a safety, as an Eric Berry type playmaker. Really special athlete. I'd put him maybe not quite in the Malachi Starks athlete category because Malachi had such tremendous measurables in high school, but Aaron Gregory is going to be one of the best in the state in the sophomore class.
Yeah, let me follow up on a couple of those things here just for a moment, starting with Gaston, because, listen, I'm actually really happy with what Georgia's done from an offensive line standpoint with its class of 2024. I think in a year in which some of the industry experts will say, a little bit of a weaker crop, not quite as many elite offensive linemen across the country, I think Georgia's strategy of therefore saying, okay, we're going to focus on elite trade. We're going to find like the giant guys, bigger, larger than life type prospects, 4-star variety in many cases, but, kind of focusing on that elite trait and say, hey, we're going to bet big if the overall depth in this class is perhaps not, what it sometimes is. However, I do think that also puts a huge spotlight on 2025 where in state there are a lot of really good offensive linemen. In battles like the thing that has made Georgia, I just believe, has been the success of its offensive line. This year, perhaps that's also starting to kind of round into form at the right time there as well. And for Georgia, you've heard me say this before, I think those line of scrimmage battles in state for the class of 2025 are just going to be massive. And on the offensive line, it's kind of the same way. And so Gaston's presence on Saturday, I do view as a really big deal because I do believe both lines of scrimmage in-state recruiting in the class of 2025 are going to be enormous.
You got to also throw in, let's throw some flowers, Brandon, where I think flowers are deserved, and I mean kudos. I think Stacey Searles has done an amazing job for Georgia since he's been there. Not just on the field with Georgia's offensive line being very effective, plugging in players like Monroe Freeling, Dylan Fairchild, Micah Morris in the second wave, Jared Wilson, that are really ready to play. But, I mean, on the recruiting trail, Brandon, what he's done, he's almost really kind of sweeping the board with a lot of his top targets that are interested in what Georgia has to offer and not just strictly a large inducement play with NIL. I think Searles has done a remarkable job combining both of those assets when maybe Georgia in years past either got all the hog mollies really great on recruiting, but then sometimes people wondered what's happening on 4th and 1 and 3rd and 1 and how much they're really protecting the quarterback. I think Stacey Searles is doing a remarkable job right now. It's even continuing into the 2025 class with David Sanders Jr. and Juan Gaston Jr. building the right relationships. And you've got Georgia. I don't know if they'll go 6 deep in offensive tackles or offensive linemen in the 2025 class like they did in 2024, but I think they'll go at least 4 or 5 deep because the attrition coming to the offensive line, you've really just kind of trying to replace the chairs in the room. And like you said, man, the bodies are massive, and that's one of the things I've remarked a lot about in the last couple of weeks. Florida might be recruiting well, but they're not recruiting that side of the ball in the trenches really well at all. And I think as long as Georgia continues to emphasize it's a line of scrimmage league, I think they're going to be fantastic in the trenches for years to come, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Let's talk more about Terrell Anderson for a moment because I don't believe you and I have really talked about him on this show, but it seems like a lot of my private conversations, he's coming up a little bit more. As you say, NC State commit, wide receiver, coming into town this weekend. Seems like there's a little bit of a sort of a recruiting service divide about exactly what kind of prospect that he is. I guess the thing you perhaps like the best here is he is 6'3", so he brings pretty good size to the table here for Georgia. But beyond that, what do you make of Anderson overall? And for perhaps some of our audience that's only just now getting acquainted with this possible flip candidate for UGA, what more can you tell us about him?
Well, he's North Carolina, and anytime the Dogs go into North Carolina, it's usually for a good reason. The Grimsley High School, that's where Jamal Jarrett hails from, and there's also a young defensive end by the name of Bryce Davis that they really like in the 2025 class. Grimsley High's been pretty good to Georgia of late. Brandon, I think this is one of those situations that we were not going to, beat our chest about it a little bit, like a 6-0 ranking on Go With The Flow,
sure,
a 6-0 weekend on Go With The Flow, but he feels to me like he's been a solid decommitment for a while now, and Georgia, he's got Georgia fans in his family. I believe his father's a big Georgia fan. He visited Georgia for the Kentucky game. He really liked what he saw. I mean, Brendan, can you imagine a recruit that was and this kind of goes for Marcellus Barnes, who's committed to Virginia Tech right now out of Tennessee, that Georgia really likes as a potential flip candidate as well. Can you imagine you're committed to an NC State or a Virginia Tech, and then all of a sudden you walk into Sanford Stadium for the first time, and like in Terrell Anderson's case, Brian McClendon, BMAC, was actually out to see one of his games. And then you walk into that cathedral with everything going on with the lights and fans and the trumpet player, and they got a former NFL Dog alumni calling the Dogs, and there's 93,000, and people are kind of raging in the stands, man. It's kind of hard not to be wowed by that. And I think that's what happened with Terrell Anderson. Going to get his official visit this weekend when a lot of people wondered whether it was going to come, but whether it was going to be Ole Miss next week or Missouri this week. And I think you've got Anderson, one of those prime remaining flip candidates, Brandon. We run the top targets list every week on Before the Hedges, the guys who we think is a good mix of who Georgia needs, where there's legitimate interest on both parties. And almost exclusively the list now is all flip candidates. I could probably just call it a flip list at this point, plus the guy you can't flip in Mekhi Barrow out of Creekside in Fairburn, man. But, he's a guy visiting. You want to look to see when's the next time Barnes is going to visit. Nazir Johnson, man, Florida commitment right now. currently playing a big ball game tonight in Swainsboro against Swainsboro, who got knocked off last week by Blakely County.
Yeah,
that was
sure
kind of
did.
surprising.
Yeah.
Former Jake Fromm coach Von Lassiter leading Blakely County. But and then you've got DeMello Jones and Nazir out of Dublin. He's one of those flip candidates as well. Another defensive line commodity target that the Dogs like maybe to potentially finish out their class. So it's a busy weekend. I think this is another weekend, Brandon, quite frankly, where they're going to work on the 2024 flip. They're going to welcome all the commitments in town for one more time. But to me, I think this is another investment weekend in the class of 2025 when we start writing stories about 2025 commits, and they tell me, I kind of really knew when, and a lot of those roots, a lot of those seeds that are going to be planted this weekend are going to go a long way toward that.
So you mentioned Nazir Johnson and Makai Boro and guys like that. Like, I know how big a win for Florida would have been from a recruiting standpoint. They would have given you an on-field. They would have given them an on-field win to kind of match some of off-field momentum they've had. So clearly, a win last week for Florida would have been a very big deal for them. But on the flip side, Georgia not just getting the win, but making it convincing once again. Whether you're looking at this from what it might mean for Nazir or Boyro or guys like that, or just the sort of big picture thing of Florida may have NIL, but they don't have any success on the field against teams like UGA. What do you think Georgia's win meant last week from a recruiting standpoint?
I think it basically just validated, what the eyes tell you about the present is probably going to be the future as well. Georgia continues to recruit those massive humans like Barreau, Nasir Johnson. I think Florida's gimmick this week is to break out some black helmets against Arkansas to kind of, jazz up a lot of excitement. I think Georgia is what it is, and I think Florida still is what it is in terms of that rivalry. They can preach, hey, we need you to help Georgia, to help them topple Georgia in years to come in that game. But you look at that game, you look how it was, I believe, 35-7, 36-7 at the beginning of the fourth quarter, and that's still a very, very big gap, and I don't think Florida is going to close that anytime soon. And that's the opinion I would guess here of record for this program, your show, and maybe a lot of our website. But Florida can't look at that and say they're really close or they're gaining ground when Georgia continues to beat them on the recruiting trail. They continue to beat them on the field, and it doesn't look like the gap's getting any closer. Yeah,
no, I think that's exactly right. And let me finish with this, if you don't mind. And I know you've touched on this some already, but I want to kind of broaden it out here, for a little bit more. Give me an idea of a couple of snapshots about what you think could be next for Georgia in recruiting. And just as a little bit of a thought starter to begin this, like you still hear about like Cam McHale from Statesboro. Is that a guy who's still out there for the 2024 class for Georgia? And then if not him, then who? Early dominoes that could fall for 2025 if you want to. We're kind of in that weird time where we're still far enough away from early signing period that it sort of feels like we're not quite there yet, but we're obviously, sort of way down the road with most of the 2024 process here. In addition to Anderson, whether it be McHale or whatever else, like what's still out there and what possibly could be next for Georgia in the immediate when it comes to this 2024 class?
Yeah, McHale's a name. He's also expected to be in town this weekend. I neglected to mention him. He's kind of a guy, Brandon, that, props to him because I remember talking to him last January. And what he said in last January is still the roadmap he's following. Cam's like, I probably won't make a decision until the signing day in February of his senior year, and that's kind of, he's holding true to his course. He took his official to Georgia in the summer. He knows what he's getting there. And then he's just kind of playing things out. I think the development with Georgia and Cam McHale out of Statesboro, really phenomenal athlete. Georgia likes him as a defensive back. The rest of the country likes him as a, hey, you can play whatever you want when you come here. And that's kind of how Georgia's tune with him kind of changed a little bit after things were developing with Georgia with, like, watching Nycar trend away and everything else like that. I think Georgia has welcomed him to say, hey, we'll give you a shot on the offensive side of the ball. We just want you in the program. Brandon, this is a big kid. Got that South Georgia red clay, good playing football in him. Really fast kid. He's another 10.5, 10.55. Kid on the track, which Georgia always seems to look for burners these days to be in its secondary. I think he would be an amazing fit for Georgia, but I just think, Brendan, he might be the one name you and I are talking about on January the 28th. still not having made his decision. And the other thing to think about with Cam, man, is you just got to look at who he's looking at. Tennessee, they remain a contender.
Yeah.
Colorado, that's a contender for him. So you've got a lot of a splash and a lot of hoopla on a big stage on the Big 12, I guess, now with Cam McHale playing for Coach Prime. And then you've got Tennessee, and you know that Tennessee offer comes with more than just playing in front of 103,000 or 105,000 inside Neyland Stadium. So you look at that, and it gives you a kind of a picture of what it's looking for. I think Cam's going to have to make a decision where he wants to go in terms of the fit, how he wants to showcase himself on Saturdays, and then also what's really important to him. Is it the NFL development, or is it kind of the upfront attention and the other things that those two other programs, those two other really big contenders offer for him? As far as Anderson and Barnes, those guys have told me, and even Mekhi Barrow, those guys have told me that they're going to kind of watch and wait, keep their decision revving in neutral a little bit, and kind of wait and see where they're at in December. I think those are going to probably be the bigger things to watch in December, kind of like Georgia saw some names move late with guys like Kyron Jones, Chris Peel, places like that. I think Georgia's going to have a late close, but it's going to be a lot of guys like that senior year evals also play a big part there as well.
Hey, listen, I don't have any problem with that. I love to see guys earn their way into a class like this with a big performance in their senior season. That just seems like the way it should be sometimes. So that's good stuff to consider, Jeff. We appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger today. Looking forward to seeing you in the between the hedges there tomorrow. There at Dooley Field, Sanford Stadium. We've only got a couple of home games left, and as I told our audience before, this may be the last time we ever have 3:30 CBS there, so I know it'll be a special day and a fun time there between the hedges, as it always is. Jeff, I'll look forward to seeing you there then.
Hey, Brandon, everybody stay warm out there. I'll see you in Sanford tomorrow, and you have a good call tonight, man.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Appreciate your time.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, I promise I won't get too nostalgic, but it really is weird to me how the season sort of plays out, because our season, as you've heard me say many times before, it's just the shortest of them all. If we were big NBA fans, I mean, that season never ends. Like international soccer, it feels like that's just a wraparound. Like it's like this season lasts longer than the full calendar year. It sort of feels like anyway. But our season's just short. It's 12 regular season games. And at the beginning of like my grandfather used to have season tickets, right? And I've told this before. So in the mail, there's that like cardboard thing that came where you tear off all of the tickets. And I just remember when it's summertime and the big cardboard thing would come and you'd have all that, those tickets all kind of connect together, sort of the perforation that holds them together. It always just looked so cool. But it doesn't take very long for those tickets to start getting torn off. And by the time you got down to like what used to either be the Auburn game or the Tech game, they're all gone. You're like, where did the season go? I remember thinking that as a kid, like, where does the season go? How does it go by so fast? And now, of course, if you're a season ticket holder now, they don't even do the cardboard stuff anymore. You just have the digital tickets. But for like credentials and media type things, they still have the stuff they mail to you. And so it comes in an envelope, and you reach in there, you pull one out, and then you pull the next one out. And then finally you start reaching the envelope, and it doesn't feel quite so full anymore. And so after tomorrow, we'll just have one home game left, and it'll be next Saturday. It's just really weird how quickly our season gets away from us. But, hey, listen, we're going to make the most of it and enjoy it. And so whatever you're doing tomorrow, in the stadium, watching with friends at home, hey, take advantage of a great college football Saturday, what has a chance to be a great Georgia win. I'm excited about it, and I hope you're as looking forward to it just as much as I am. Something else I'm looking forward to is, because when the season's done, you got to have something else to be excited about. That's just the way my brain works. And y'all know the thing that I'm excited about more than anything else is a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. In fact, I've got a couple already on the books for 2024. The DawgNation cruise you already know about, but many of you have also heard there as well about January of 2024. I get a chance to be on Icon of the Seas. And I still keep hearing things about Icon of the Seas, about what's going to make it so much bigger and so much better and truly unique compared to any cruise ship that's ever sailed before. It's a combination of like the largest water park at sea with like a beach resort and, incredible entertainment options, almost like you're in Las Vegas, the special neighborhoods. And there's actually, the larger sort of cruise ships in the Royal Caribbean fleet over the course of the last few years have kind of taken these neighborhood concepts. Well, there's different sections of the ship, and each of these sections you sort of feel like you're in something that's it just doesn't even feel like a cruise ship hardly. Well, there's even some new concepts there on that when it comes to the brand new Icon of the Seas. Plus, phenomenal entertainment options there as well. There's like a dueling pianos bar. Just so many cool things going on here. So I can't wait to be on it in January. Can't wait to come back and tell you all about it after that. But really, I don't want you to wait to hear my first-person account of all of this. I want you to get your own Royal Caribbean cruise vacation planned up today. Our friend Jessica Slater, great travel agent, specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean. She can help you with this. So give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. And if you can't be on Icon in January or at some point in time in 2024, we hope to see you on the DawgNation cruise coming up in April there as well, because that is going to be a terrific time. All right. Let us go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean, and let's give you some final thoughts here on the biggest games of the upcoming weekend. I'm going to try to keep this succinct, but I tell you, I have really been wrestling with Alabama, LSU all week long, because what I don't like to do is completely contradict my previous takes, and at the beginning of the year, obviously, I was very high on LSU. I believe that successful people make up their mind quick and change their mind slow. But over the course of the year, I have probably changed my mind somewhat on LSU because they are not in any shape or form the team I thought they would be. They're far worse on defense. Jaden Daniels as a quarterback has been far better than I assumed that he would be. So even as LSU seemingly is starting to play a little bit better perhaps, they're still not quite the same team I expect them to be. So it's almost like my original prediction of LSU is not particularly relevant. So what do you then think is going to happen on Saturday? Well, here's the one thing I think sort of keeps coming back to for me. When you look at the point spread, it's been kind of hovering around a field goal all week long. Now, when you hear me, you need to check your own listing to sort of find out exactly where you can find the game at. But it's been around that sort of 3.5 point number. Obviously, the half point there in that spot is a key number. To me, what you're saying is that on a neutral field right now, because you typically award 3 points for being at home, that's kind of the baked-in scenario there with it when it comes to point spreads. But on a neutral field, odds makers are telling you that they right now view LSU and Alabama as an even team. And I got to tell you, I just can't get there. I just can't. You're talking about an LSU team that in the sort of efficiency metrics defensively, the computers, the math nerds, the analytics types, I mean, they'll tell you that LSU's barely in the top 90 right now. And a team that's that weak on that side of the ball, I can't put them even with Alabama right now, which to me sort of puts the value on Alabama here in this game. A lot of this for me sort of comes down to which team gets the style of game that it wants. You know, LSU comes into the game averaging 47 points per game. They want as many possessions as possible because they know they're going to allow some touchdowns when their defense is on the field. By comparison, Alabama's been much more deliberate this year. They're only averaging 30 points per game. So they want the game to be played much slower. They want the game to sort of feel like the old school Nick Saban days of pre-Lane Kiffin as offensive coordinator when Alabama was kind of looking to grind it out with wins. Now, the recent history in this series will tell you that may not be so easy to do. The total here sits at, 59.5? 3 of the last 4 Alabama-LSU games have gone over that total. But let's also keep in mind this. This might be Nick Saban's last game coaching against LSU. Obviously not a guarantee, and perhaps it's a little bit of a long shot, but you at least have to consider it a possibility. It's at least one of the last games he'll ever coach against LSU. And you got to assume, with respect for the coach here, what he's been, that he is not going to have one of these games against LSU where it's 1,000,000 points and he's sort of holding on for dear life in a game that he can't really control. You got to think in what might be his last big shot to go head-to-head against LSU, what has been a great rivalry, that he's going to try to assert himself as a coach in this game and get the style of game that he wants. And in a lower-scoring game, all the more reason to sort of favor Alabama here in this spot. And by the way, for what it's worth, in terms of getting the kind of game you want, that's sort of been what Alabama's been pretty good at here this year. Go look at 26-20 against Texas A&M, 24-21 against Arkansas. Even against Tennessee, it's 34-20. The win earlier this year against Ole Miss, high-powered Rebels offense, final score was 24-10. Alabama gets a comfortable 2-touchdown win, and it does so right now playing the style and at the pace in which Alabama's comfortable. That's what I believe happens tomorrow there as well. On a neutral field, I still view Alabama to be the better team. I also view Alabama more capable of getting the pace and style of game than it wants tomorrow, and all of that favors the Crimson Tide for me. Then moving on, it's Texas A&M against Ole Miss. Ole Miss is at home as a 3-point favorite. If LSU were to win, if I'm wrong about my Alabama pick and LSU wins, then Ole Miss, by winning this game, can come to Athens next week with a whole lot on the line. But I'm skeptical of Ole Miss here in this spot. Part of that reason is because Ole Miss has played a couple of games this year that were far closer than they probably should have been. Kind of only a touchdown win against a pretty bad Auburn team. A low score, final margin of victory against what's not a very good Arkansas team. Against a backup quarterback for Tulane earlier this year, Ole Miss looked in danger of losing that game for a little while. This is also an Ole Miss team a year ago that started 7-0 but lost 4 of its last final 5 games in the season last year. This is an Ole Miss team I believe at times is sort of lacking in maturity. On the other side, Texas A&M is just flat out not very good, but they're not dead yet either. They won 30-13 against South Carolina last Saturday, sort of staying alive with some sort of level of respectability. Inside of a field goal, do I think they can keep it there on Saturday? I do. I like the Aggies +3 on the road at Ole Miss on Saturday. Stepping outside the SEC here for a moment may surprise you, but with Notre Dame going to Clemson, with all the chatter around Clemson here this week, I actually like the Tigers +3 against Notre Dame. And for me, a lot of this is just sort of the basic heat check type thing where at some point Notre Dame is probably due for a little bit of a comeback to earth moment here. Let me kind of give you an idea of why I feel that way. Let's go back to the sort of marquee game against Ohio State. They lost 17-14, had their chances to win, just could not muster any offense. After that, it's a 21-14 win against Duke. That's a ranked Blue Devils team, but the truth is that's also a Duke win for Notre Dame that doesn't feel as impressive now as it did when they got it. They lose to Louisville. They beat USC, but USC is a total mess. They won 58-7 last week against Pitt, but immediately after the game, you've got Pat Narduzzi calling out players calling out Narduzzi. The situation for Pitt right now might be a mess. This is not for me a total stand against Notre Dame. I don't think it's a bad football team. I just believe it's a team due for a heat check. And when you think about key numbers, obviously 3, where this point spread is a key number. But you know what? 1 is also a key number there as well. So perhaps Notre Dame wins. Perhaps they only win by a point or at least inside of a field goal. I think Clemson, you go back and look at the game that sort of caused all the trouble for them as of late, what happened against NC State. The truth is, statistically speaking, they didn't play that bad. The number one issue for the Tigers has been a massive amount of turnover. A lot of that from Cade Klubnik, a lot of that in the red zone. But if you can correct that even for 1 week, it's enough for Clemson, who has not probably stopped completely playing, despite the fact what some Clemson fans see. Probably not impossible for them to keep it inside that number. A little bit of a contrarian play, but I like Clemson +3. I also like the underdog in the Bedlam rivalry game as Oklahoma State hosts Oklahoma. For me, this comes down to 2 things really, really simply. First of all, you've seen Oklahoma now play pretty bad 2 weeks in a row. They scuffled with UCF, and they flat-out lost last week to Kansas, and Jalen Daniels, the Jayhawks quarterback, didn't play, so Oklahoma, previously undefeated, lost to a backup quarterback last week. What I think you see with Oklahoma right now is just sort of basic regression to the mean. This was a team whose season win total to begin the year was 9.5. Right now, this is feeling like the sort of Oklahoma team that may lose 1 or 2 more times before this year comes to an end. So in a tough rivalry spot where Oklahoma State's got a ton to play for here, Oklahoma may find itself in a little bit of a challenging spot. And if there's a close call to be had, you got to imagine the officials are sort of leaning the direction of Oklahoma State. Keep that in mind there as well. Perhaps, maybe they're on that. But the other thing here is the truth is, for all the sort of jokes that have always been made about Mike Gundy, the old days of I'm a man, I'm 40. He had the mullet there for a while, which cable news network he chooses to watch. Whatever issues have seemed to exist with Gundy, the one thing that should not get obscured is he has been very good against the spread for the most part as a head coach. In fact, you look at his last 20 games at home against Big 12 competition, 12-7-1 against the spread there in that spot. He's getting 6 on Saturday. They've got the best player in this game, Ollie Gordon, the running back, having a phenomenal year for the Pokes. I actually like Oklahoma State plus the 6 there on Saturday. And then I'm also going to give you one more here. I'll take USC plus 3.5 against Washington. This for me is mostly just sort of a feeler, a little bit of a trial balloon on the basis of the fact that Washington, much like Oklahoma, has really looked pretty rough the last couple of weeks. And perhaps, like we've said already, there's a little bit of a not quite dead yet scenario in play for USC. A Washington team seems to be looking for a soft spot to land right now. So I'll take a flyer on USC plus the 3.5. against Washington. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, tomorrow, cannot wait to see you in Athens all day long. Of course, if you see me, please come by and say hello. But I especially want to see you after the show for our DawgNation, after the game, I should say, for our DawgNation postgame show, second floor of the UGA bookstore. So tomorrow, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get back to taking your live calls. We've had some tremendous calls over the course of the last few weeks. Really, really love the energy around our postgame show right now. It's been a lot of fun. And if you're going to the game, this is super easy to do. Come by UGA bookstore, second floor, pop on the air. We'll give you a chance to do sort of a live call with us there for that. The DawgNation postgame show has been so much fun the last few weeks, and so tomorrow another chance to do that from the UGA bookstore, something I always love to do. Now, something else I love on our DawgNation postgame show there as well is our Player of the Game feature. Last week, Ladd McConkey won for a really Herculean effort returning from injury at a time in which Georgia needed a playmaker to step up. Ladd stepped up in a very big way for UGA. You love to see that, and we really appreciate the Stein Law Firm for helping make that Player of the Game a possibility. And I want to recommend the Stein Law Firm to you if you find yourself hurt in an accident, injured, someone you love has been. When you're facing a situation in which you feel like you deserve compensation, let our friends at the Josh Stein and his folks at the Stein Law Firm take care of you and fight to perhaps get you what you deserve in a situation like this. Because some of the personal injury firms you may have heard of before, some of these things are like in 1,000 states and they got, a million whatever. And to them, all you might be is just another manila folder, just another file, a case number, perhaps no personal attention. But our friends at the Stein Law Firm are a little bit more of a boutique-style firm. They're going to give you that small firm level of attention you deserve. Plus, Josh Stein is a 2-time graduate of the University of Georgia. We call those double dogs, including the UGA Law School. He loves helping dog fans in their time of need, and he wants to help you there as well. So please find him online at Stein Law Firm. That's Stein spelled Stein. Stein Law Firm. Find him today. So I have to beg your pardon for one thing here as we wrap up. I have had a good number of computer issues over the course of the last few days, which is going to be rectified here very soon, but it is not as of yet. That means that the sort of like Friday shoe dump we like to do with a whole bunch of golden shoes, we don't quite have those. We had so many great submissions coming off the Florida game, and a lot of these I have not been able to give due credit to because I've just had a lot of computer issues. So we'll get that fixed, be ready to go hopefully for next week. But I do have a great one to give you for today, and I appreciate our producer, Michael Carville, giving this to you. Gary Marks sends this. He says, I'm listening to the Victory Pie with my favorite beverage. And so this is going back to Monday, enjoying DawgNation daily after a big win for Georgia against Florida. And he's got the Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, zero sugar. Gary, I really appreciate you being a part of our show, supporting one of our great sponsors in Dr. Pepper, and enjoying the brand new Strawberries and Cream, zero sugar. So that's a super cool thing to do, Gary. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for being a part of that. A well-deserved golden shoe for you, for your support of us and our friends at Dr. Pepper. And by the way, lousy, stinking Gators. They'll be lucky to beat Arkansas tomorrow. We don't even know how that's going to turn out. But we do know this. It has been a long time since they've had anything to brag about when it comes to Georgia. In fact, let's give you a Gator, hater, updater. How about 1,091 days the last time that Florida beat Georgia? That's a number that's going to keep climbing, we believe, for a long time to come. But for now, our focus is Missouri. Game day tomorrow. We'll see you in Athens. And then back here Monday for DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll talk to you then, everybody. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. All right, so we've done, I would say, a fair share of good comments all week long. Y'all, I've got to be quick today, and I apologize for that, but we just got a million things, just a million things. Some of that's personal related, I have to confess, but we're going to have a good stretch of comments here for a few minutes, and then we're going to bounce out the door after that. But I do want to see you in Athens, so if you can't be there, call our postgame show tomorrow. Give me a good call. I always need, and if you're watching right now, I'm assuming you're one of these people, I always need good Georgia fans to give me some good Georgia content on that postgame show. I want to play off your opinions. I want to play off your takes. I want it to be more than just me. So a good number of our folks in these comment sections do call us on Saturdays. If you've never called before, tomorrow's a great day to do it. Michael Carville works hard to get you on, get you off pretty quick. We try not to keep you waiting too long. We get you on, we get you going here. And we'll do that for you tomorrow. So If you can't be there in person, call us on the show. But if you are there, come by and see me. I'd love to say hello to you, shake your hand, celebrate what we hope is a big win for Georgia tomorrow. We'll do all of that. Ryan Wilbank says, I'm always trying to leave early on a Friday. So this is not for a good reason. I have some personal stuff going on today, unfortunately. Barry Watkins says, go Dogs, go. Getting to 9-0. You love that. Johnny Prescott says, is Mizzou a cupcake or not? I say not. Missouri's not a cupcake. Now, Georgia may win somewhat convincingly, but not a cupcake. David Hogue, thank you for the kind words. He's got Georgia winning 38-23. There you go. Rob Phillips taking it back to remember the first time Georgia Missouri played in 2012 when was it Sheldon Richardson is what the guy's name called it old man football. That is a little bit of a blast from the past, and obviously Jarvis Jones, the Dogs went out there and whipped them up in Columbia. That was a fun thing, and so show them a little grown man football. I like that. Joseph Kennedy has his thoughts about Missouri in here. Celicia Gagnon checking in. Celicia, we're glad to see you. Terry Rigdon says, has anybody thought about how ESPN has disrespected the two-time national champion Dogs this year? I guess so. But, I mean, we had game day in Athens back-to-back weeks in 2021. So I feel like they've sort of done right by Georgia on that. I mean, a lot of this may be the perception of Missouri as much as it is the perception of Georgia, I guess. Alan Verbanchik says, not only am I leaving early on Friday, I'm also not wearing UGA gear. Yeah, so I used to try to bring my Friday night clothes to change into, but the honest truth is, some of y'all know I'm a little bit of a knucklehead, right? I mean, like, I'm not the most organized person. Most of the days, we're just sort of doing well to get on the air. I'm sort of a disheveled mess. You know, normally when I'm doing the show, like within the confines of the show, I'm just as buttoned up as possible. But around that, I'm fairly disorganized. So if I were to bring my regular show attire and then try to change into my Friday night attire for the high school game, there's a very good chance I'm going to forget something. I mean, listen, once again, not to bore you, but I've been supposed to bring something to work 2 days in a row, and I forgot it 2 days in a row. Now, I brought it today, but the last 2 days I've done that. So part of the reason why I wear my game day clothes on Friday is because decent chance I'd forget them if I didn't. That's probably more than you wanted to know. Clint Haynes says he's got Georgia 42-24. Big high-scoring game there. Octavius Oliver says, let's get Dominic Lovett off to a good start. I like that. I think Lovett's a pretty important player. And one of the topics, sometimes you don't get to all the topics you want to get to in a week. One of the topics I'd sort of wanted to address was the idea of, Lovett against his old team. So here's my theory on this, that sometimes it really matters when you're playing your old team. Like, think about Cade Mays, for an instance. Mays is a Knoxville family, chose Georgia initially, went back to Tennessee. If a Cade Mays is playing Georgia, that's a pretty big deal. There's some, I don't want to say bad blood there necessarily, although I guess there was some blood of some kind around the Mazes, but nonetheless, but there are some sort of transfer situations where you sort of feel like, ooh, there's a little bit of an extra juice here, a little bit of an extra, extra thing, kind of going on there with that. In the case of Lovett, I mean, he just left Missouri, right? It's like maybe Missouri feels like they've got bad blood towards him, but I don't get any impression that Lovett feels like he's got any bad blood towards Missouri, I don't think. And plus, given the fact that there's a lot of Missouri receivers who are enjoying very good years here right now, they may be happy Lovett's gone. In other words, instead of like, oh, we're going to show this guy, he should have never left. I mean, that's more touches for Burden. That's more touches for what's his name. There's a little bit more touches to be had. They may be glad that he's gone. So I think it's important to get Lovett going tomorrow because I believe that Lovett's an important part of this Georgia offense right now. But I don't quite view Lovett in the same category that you would perhaps view one of these transfer players who there's going to be a lot of attention on playing against his old school. Don't quite think that's the case. Barry Watkins is trying to get me in trouble with the food coloring again. Y'all got to be careful about that now. Y'all got to be careful. People are gonna believe you if you say that. Over at YouTube here for a moment on a Friday. Taylor Russell kind of got my reference from a little bit earlier. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style says, is Ryan Day the best candidate for Bama? Let me tell you something. If Ryan Day tried to coach at Alabama and the intensity around that program, he'd have those gray hairs popping right through that hair dye. I mean, like you'd have to get some sort of industrial strength, turpentine or something like that to keep the gray hairs from coming out. Darian Ford says, I'm a little sentimental about the end of the CBS era. Growing up watching the games with my granddad are my favorite memories. Yeah, I'm kind of the same way. I mean, first of all, like the SEC and CBS also existed for a long time now, too. I mean, like people obviously know the Brad Nessler era now. They remember the Vern Lundquist era before that. But you go back to an era prior to that. Y'all remember Sean McDonough doing the SEC on CBS games? McDonough was doing those for a while. So, I mean, like the SEC went to CBS originally because they lost the NFC. NFC went to Fox. CBS needed some programming, so they sort of built up the idea of a big college football Saturday game. That's where the SEC on CBS, the sort of marquee status of it, that's kind of what it generated from, was when CBS lost the NFL. So when I was a kid, NFC was on CBS, AFC was on NBC, and you had Monday Night Football on ABC, and that was all there was TV-wise. And then, obviously, when Fox came around, they stole the NFC. For a good while, CBS didn't have the NFL. And eventually, they got the AFC package, and it sort of existed that way for the most part today, although I guess now the TV contract's a little bit different. The point is, so when CBS was sort of out of the NFL business, they said, hey, we got to try to figure out some sort of sports thing to do. And so that's where the CBS SEC thing came from. In fact, I think that's also kind of the genesis of some of the Notre Dame stuff on NBC there, too, which was we're out of the NFL business. We got to have some sort of big marquee sport. And so they sort of negotiated their own deal with Notre Dame. I believe how that came about. But I know that CBS kind of got into the SEC business because of the absence of the NFL product there on Sundays. And I do think they do a really good job. CBS makes it feel big. And maybe you have to be like a media type to care about this. I'll admit that I'm a little bit – like when I was a kid, I was media obsessed. I was always into like radio and TV and newspapers. Like I was really into the media. And if you're not like really into the media, you may not care about stuff like this. I totally get that. But to me, everything on ESPN and you've heard me say this before, everything on ESPN feels very cable-y. There's a lot of score tickers. There's a lot of checking back at SportsCenter. Here's what's coming up. Like all of it just feels very cable TV to me. And like when you watch CBS, it just feels big. In fact, watch ESPN's coverage of Monday Night Football. Deep down, ESPN sort of knows it's sort of cable-y because they sort of do Monday Night Football a little bit of a different type of way. They try to make it feel bigger because goodness knows they're paying Joe Buck and Troy Aikman enough to do those games. They try to make it feel a little bit bigger. So CBS, I think, has always done a good job of making the games feel big. And by the way, you perhaps have noticed this. In recent years, like ESPN, hopefully not for like the primetime, Saturday night games, but ESPN uses a lot fewer cameras than it used to, too. If you really watch closely, you can notice this. Think about if you're watching the midweek games, how often you see, big touchdown, and some dude just like jumps up and cheers and gets in the way of the camera, and you can't even see what's happening there. There's just a lot fewer camera angles to be had in some of these ESPN games than there used to be. And CBS, I think, still makes it feel pretty big. So I'm going to miss it too. I really am. Ducati 1098 says, I hate Danielson for years. He's just annoying. I do get that, and a lot of people feel that way. I'm also of the belief that once somebody has the reputation for being annoying, they're now treated as annoying, and it's sort of like the things they do are sort of seen as extra annoying because they have the reputation of being annoying, if that makes sense. And so I do get some of the criticism of Danielson, but I think some of that also is like a snowball effect where like it's compounded on itself for all of these years that now it's perhaps overstated, maybe not for you, Ducati, but I think for some people it's perhaps overstated because it's just the thing that people think. I mean, to be honest with you, like he is one of the still small handful of true like media names that kind of move the needle, where it's like, once again, to be very sort of insular here for a moment. Like if you were to use his name in like a website headline or something like that, it still kind of moves the needle a little bit. So people clearly have an opinion about Danielson, and when you've had the big TV, presence that he's had, you kind of understand where that sort of comes from. Christy says Danielson forgets who's playing. It's always Bama. Yeah, it sort of seems like that. That is probably fair. Taylor Russell also throwing it back to Keith Jackson, calling that final Rose Bowl game between Texas and USC. What a great moment that was. And, yeah, Jackson's one of those terrific voices, man. Terrific voices. Frank Patterson says, can you imagine the CBS theme song next year? It says playing over slow motion highlights of Penn State versus Purdue. Shaking my head. Yeah, that's about right. That's about right. Spencer Clark says, as long as we limit explosive plays, we should be fine. I would like to think that's true. Jonathan Aaron wondering if the 5-star Connor Stallion is going to be in Athens tomorrow. Yeah, I don't know about that. The Michigan stuff is getting pretty weird these days. It's getting pretty weird. Let's see what else. Paul Moon on the subject of Nitro Tuggle. So the other day, Jeff thought he said he thought that Nitro was still fine. I mean, obviously there's a lot of chatter out there. There's a lot of smoke related to that. So we shall see. We shall see. But didn't he say like 2 weeks ago that he thought Nitro was still fine? Because I did ask him about him. But we'll see. I mean, you know how that goes. And by the way, Ducati also mentioning that the idea of the spy for Notre Dame, for Michigan being named Connor Stallion is like the most amazing thing in the world. What a great name that is. Sounds like a Tom Clancy novel as it is. DT also pointing out that if you want the proper lineage of Alabama coaches, perhaps going from Nick Saban, who, I mean, you better believe he'll have a fresh coat of paint tomorrow on his hair for the big games he always does, to Ryan Day, who's just like, psh. I mean, he's just spraying that, that beard dye on. You better. That does seem like a pretty appropriate sort of passing down of the lineage there. That seems pretty appropriate. All right, like one or two more comments, y'all. We got to go after that. I'm sorry. Let's see what else. So some of you have asked about our good friend Ella, who did the weather with us last year. The main reason we have not gone back doing that again, I mean, I'd obviously love to have Ella back on the show anytime, but this is like tedious. It's sort of boring. But last year, I also hosted the pregame show, and so therefore we did the weather report as part of the pregame show. So this year, I'm just not doing the weather for the pregame, and that's why Ella hasn't been doing this here. At least that's my reasoning anyway. But perhaps we'll have her back on at some point in time. Just our game day coverage has been a little bit different, and so therefore I haven't been doing some of the same stuff that I was doing a year ago. But that's really the only explanation there for that. I enjoyed our visits, would love to have her back sometime, and perhaps we will. But just to get like kind of into the weeds here a little bit, last year we would do the weather report as a part of the pregame show, and this year we're doing something a little bit different there on that. Let's see what else. But if we do, y'all can't be simping in the comment sections. I will say that. Let's see what else. Mark Littleton says Ryan Day's got Elvis's hair, which is funny. Daniel Aldrich laughing about the Nick Saban hair. I'm glad to enjoy that. All right. Final thing here. Stick D's asking about money being a deciding factor for somebody. Who is that, Stick? I'm not sure who you're talking about. Foster and Cineo having some fun in the comment section over here too. All right, let's get a couple of quick ones to get out of here on. Brian Lindsay getting ready to check out. Brian, appreciate that. Kevin Cook says the offensive passing average over 330 yards. What more do you need? as far as attracting the great wide receivers. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, obviously, right now, this is setting up to be another very successful Georgia offense. And really, you could make a case that the biggest question facing Georgia before the year began was, how do you replace Todd Monken? Because let's be honest here. You know, Georgia rose to a national championship level program pretty quickly after Todd Monken got here. I'm not going to say it's because of Todd Monken, but gosh knows he put his fingerprints on that national championship trophy in a pretty significant way. The fact that Georgia right now is achieving at a similar clip to what Monken was achieving at, I think that's a huge statement for the program. So, A, that's a cool thing for UGA, and as you said, it ought to be sort of a selling point for a lot of the top, wide receivers that are out there. But we also kind of know what's going on with that right now. We just do. And I'm not saying that Georgia doesn't have something to figure out as it relates to that, but we kind of know what the story with all of that has been, the role that NIL is playing, in particular with wide receiver recruits here right now. Miriam Corbin. Miriam and our good friend Kathy Aquaviva, who, by the way, so Kathy's a long-time commenter. And for like a million years, I pronounced her name wrong. And I love Kathy. And that she came up to me one time, and she's like, I just want to let you know that it's not, I used to call her, is that Aquavia that I used to call her? I used to call her Aquavia, Kathy Aquavia. I just want to let you know it's Aquaviva, which is kind of a cool sounding name anyway. So Kathy Aquaviva making an appearance tomorrow along with Miriam. You'd love to see that, which I would love to see both of you tomorrow. Obviously, missed my chance to see Miss Miriam at the game last week, and she was going to be one of the golden shoes we showed this week because she had a really cool DawgNation. We'll eventually show this to you. Just let me get some stuff cleared up on my computer. We'll do that. All right, then last comments. Crow King 123 says, for all the ESPN boycotters out there, going to be hard not to watch them. I think they're going to have a monopoly in the SEC. Yeah, that's kind of a good point. And like, I have probably watched less of the pregame shows, and I typically get to watch them much anyway, just because I'm usually traveling. But when I'm home, my son and I always like to watch them there too. We've probably done less of that this year because, that's the thing is a lot of you've sort of outgrown ESPN Game Day and stuff like that. But if you've got a son around the age mine is, that stuff is still sort of for them. A lot of sort of those TV things you sort of enjoy seeing week after week after week. Kids still really like that kind of stuff, and we haven't done this much of that here this year. Chief Jay Bowen wants LSU to put Alabama out of its misery this weekend. We'll see if that happens. Waylon Wilson, who, by the way, is also kind of in the queue here for some good golden shoes, says, I'm going to start a GoFundMe for a new computer for BA. Yeah, it's close to being fixed. And a lot of this is it's sort of hard to explain. All right. Good stuff. Thank you all for being here. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Ran into Dari last week at the game. That was a fun thing to see. Dari's a good guy, loves Georgia football, loves Georgia fans, loves taking care of them when it comes to your air conditioning and heating and plumbing and electric needs. And by the way, speaking of heating right now, it is time to get that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs because at night anyway, sort of feels like winter is here. Cold weather, so stay warm with our friends at RS Andrews. Get that heating system ready to go for a long, cold winter that is on its way. rsandrews.com for more on that. And folks, don't forget, this evening it's Go with the Flow presented by RS Andrews here as we make our big picks for the games this weekend. You heard some of my thoughts there a moment ago. We'll have even more of that coming up for you later on this evening here on the DawgNation video channels. Y'all have a great day. Back here Monday. We'll see you in Athens tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We will